City Matters.
Hi, I'm Zachary Graulich, Assistant Director of Education at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County, and I'm joined with a very special guest today, Donna Rosenblum, Director of Education at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. Thank you so much for being here, Donna.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's exciting that we get to have a conversation today about, how we can educate students without inflicting potentially either the trauma of the past onto them or encouraging them to repeat some of the traumas that took place in the past. Do you have any thoughts that you would like to share on this topic?
Well, it's complicated, as my word of 2025 is. And I agree. It's very hard to know what the right thing to do is. Every student internalizes things differently. They see things differently. And even though we think that we are providing educational material, they might interpret it differently. So we always have to be sensitive to that. But at the same time, that can't stop us from achieving our mission. So we always have to have the mission as forefront and go with that. And then if we see that we're not effective, then we have to pivot. We have to change, and we have to be able to do something differently. So I think being flexible is always the name of the game. But I think having dialogue and conversation is paramount.
Absolutely. And I think that it's interesting because you've been in the field of Holocaust education for quite some time now. So have you seen a shift in the way that Holocaust education is presented to students over the years?
Absolutely. I do feel that, and again, you're right. I've been in this field for a long time. I think a lot of the times the atrocities, some of the photos, the readings had a bit of a shock value, and I understand why, because the Holocaust is a horrific moment in history, more than just a moment, a time in history, and we don't want to whitewash it. We don't want not to deal with the severity of the Holocaust. But at the same time, we don't want to traumatize kids. We don't want them to only remember the horrific photos and not remember the stories of resilience, the stories of hope, that so many survivors came out of the Holocaust and built lives for themselves, and now have generations have come since that time. We also want to talk about the resiliency of the state of Israel. We want to talk about Judaism and how Judaism is different today than it was 80 years ago, 100 years ago. All of those things are important points. And, we have to get all of those messages across.
I completely agree. And it's challenging because when we work with students, whether it be here or at a school, or when any teacher is working with students or a student group, you only have so much time to get in the history and the important points that you want to highlight. And as you said, we want to highlight all those things. We want to talk about the resiliency. We want to talk about the horrors. We want to talk about the rescuers who stood up and did something. But we also want to highlight the bystanders who didn't do anything, because you have to understand all of the roles that were played during the Holocaust or in any event in history in order to really understand what took place and why it took place. And as you mentioned, years ago, Holocaust education was different because of that shock value. People felt that if you didn't show the true horrors and what took place, then you weren't doing it justice. Or how can you really expect kids to never commit such actions or repeat such histories if they don't see what it can lead to? So you want to show them the pictures of the piles of bodies, the videos of the bulldozers at the concentration camps, all those horrible things that you and I have seen, but now we kind of rethink that. And for myself personally, when I was in Hebrew school, my Hebrew school teachers wanted to take us on a field trip to a nearby Holocaust museum, which I am pretty sure was this one, but I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure it was this one. And my mother would not allow me to go because when she was in school, when she was in Hebrew school back in the 70s, they learned about the Holocaust, and she was shown those horrible videos and pictures and images. And to this day, she can see them as clearly as she did the day she first saw them. She can't forget them. They're forever with her. They've imprinted on her in a way that has scarred her. And to that extreme, she can't read about the Holocaust. She can't learn about it. She can't hear about it. She can't come to museums, even like this one, because it brings back the emotions that set in on that day when she was in school. And it carried over to me because she wouldn't allow me to learn about it either at that age. So we talk a lot about the trauma that can come from this type of education if not done properly. And we've come a long way. But I think it's important to recognize, while some people might feel that if you don't show those images, you're doing a disservice to the survivors and the victims, but you have to make sure that you're doing it in an appropriate way.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that here at HMTC, we really focus on the survivor testimony, and we can get across the difficulties of these stories through the survivor themselves. Right? The survivor talking about what they went through, what they experienced, the suffering, the degradation, just everything. And I think that that is much more effective because their voice is the voice we want the kids to hear. So we come back to that, and I think that both of you and I are in agreement that that is one of the best ways to get this point across, preserving these narratives, having the photographs, and of course having their own testimony being used.
Absolutely. And we're blessed that we have so much footage of survivors, not just recently, but even from 15, 20 years ago. We have quite a number of tapes that were thankfully completed around that time where we interviewed survivors who are no longer with us, but now we have their testimonies preserved and we're able to have those in our museum and show those to the kids. Do you feel, given all the tours that you've done here, do you feel that there are specific videos in the galleries that resonate with the kids more, or specific themes that are discussed sometimes in some of the videos that resonate with the kids more? Because of course, the videos, just like with the photos, have to be age appropriate. They have to be relevant to them and their lives. And I think that there are some videos, personally for me in my experience, that really engage with the kids more, and the kids are definitely more engaged when they watch that versus maybe one of the other ones. Are there any that stand out to you?
Well, I knew so many of them, so it's hard to really pick that out because I also, when I see them speaking, I think of them, and so I don't think that they're all wonderful and they all accomplish the job. So I don't think that I would go with one over the other. Obviously I'm biased that Werner, Irving, David, they have a special place in my heart because I work with them so much. So, and they were very effective in their speaking. I love the fact that in the Survivor Soulmates, David gets emotional in talking about when he sees what was happening in Rwanda. It brought him back. David always got emotional when he spoke to the kids. I don't think that he ever not almost cried every single time because he's reliving. And the kids need to see that. Absolutely. He's vulnerable. That vulnerability they identify and they empathize with. And it makes it, I'm more concerned about when we don't have the survivors.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm a great speaker. I'm not the survivor. Absolutely. I will never be able to do what they do. And I worry about that. I worry about where we will be 10 years from now, to be quite honest. And that's why we're working so much with the second generation and the third generation, because they need to talk about their parents, their grandparents. Very important.
Absolutely. Well, we talk about the evolution of Holocaust education, and we're basically at the precipice of another great shift, where, as you say, we don't have as many survivors as we used to have. And most of our survivors who are here and active and speaking to students, they were kids. They either don't remember anything or they remember very little. And while that doesn't diminish the history, because they were survivors, they are survivors, they were there, they lived, they survived, it's different. It's a different type of history. And you can see the difference, I think, with the kids sometimes, where when it's someone who remembers it clearly, they were in a camp, they were in hiding and they remember every day in hiding, they remember what they experienced. It's different. It's very different than someone who was 2 or 3 years old and they just kind of know what their family told them growing up, or whatever
Right. Or
it
they
may
escaped.
be.
I mean, there's no question.
Absolutely.
I mean, you heard Irving speak, you hear Rosalie speak. It's a whole different presentation than some of our other survivors who might have gotten out in 40, 41, even 42, and who were able to get away.
Yeah.
Not that they didn't suffer, not that it wasn't hardship, not that extended family wasn't murdered, not that their whole lives were thrown upside down. All those things are there, and again, very effective when they talk about the fact that they lost their pet, they had to give up their loved the animal that they loved. Kids can understand that, but that's not the same as going through a selection, being tattooed, being shaved from head to toe, that's very difficult. When Rosalie talks about how she had to strip naked in front of these men, and they had to touch her at 12. That's really,
Yeah. And that's not something that can be replicated by a second generation speaker. There's amazing speakers out there. We have so many amazing 2G speakers here, and there's amazing 3G speakers out there, 4G speakers, but nothing compares to the survivors. And we're so fortunate to, in 2025, say that we have pretty much 10, maybe a few more active survivors here, and that's a blessing in itself. And that's a number that, if you would ask me a couple of years ago, shortly after I started here, if I would have expected that, I would have probably said no, because there was a time just a couple of years ago where we really had maybe 5. We had 5 people actively speaking that were survivors. And thankfully, these other survivors have come out of the woodwork. They've started talking, or they always were, and we just somehow didn't know about them, whatever the situation may be. So now we're blessed to have, I would say, 10, 11, 12, and they want to do it because they understand the mission. They understand that they're, some of the last ones able to do this, and we're so grateful for them and what they're able to do. But we have to prepare for that future and what it's going to look like.
And it scares me. It does. I have to be quite honest.
Yeah.
I know we're prepared. I know we're doing everything that we can educationally, but I don't know how kids are really going to react. It's very different watching a video or reading a narrative than hearing somebody in your classroom speaking to you firsthand.
Yeah.
We know that. So we can be as prepared as we can.
Absolutely. And I think there's something else to be said, that this is the 80th year since the liberation of all the camps, 1945, and the end of the war. And, in 10, 20 years, it'll be 90, 100 years. And, my fear with the Holocaust and Holocaust education is that once you hit that kind of 100-year mark, it almost doesn't have the same impact on the kids. I feel like it's like talking about the Civil War today. It feels so long ago, so distant, so disconnected, even though it was on this soil. It was in this country. And obviously we're still feeling the after effects of the Civil War in many ways, of course, just like every war that we've experienced as a country, that we're always feeling the after effects in one way or another. And I fear that once World War II and the Holocaust reaches that point of 100 years, I don't know. The kids really might, as much as I hate to even put it to words, they might feel like it doesn't matter. It was over 100 years ago, right? It was over a century ago. I mean, that's,
yes, but I'm a little more optimistic, and I do feel that there are a lot of great Holocaust educational institutions nationwide as well as worldwide that have made it their mission to keep the testimony alive. So I do feel that it'll be a little bit different. I don't know if Revolutionary War and Civil War soldiers were, documented and recorded quite the same way that Holocaust survivors have been.
Absolutely.
And as I said, we are working so strongly, with the second generation and the third generation, that I do feel that, again, that personal mission, the second generation understand the importance of keeping their parents' stories alive. They are committed, and they will do it, and the grandchildren see it as well.
Absolutely.
So I think that we're safe for a little while.
Yeah.
I do say that maybe when we get to that 4th generation, that 5th generation, that 6th generation, maybe that might be questionable.
Yeah.
But I hope not.
I hope not as well. And it's especially, it's so much harder once you do hit that fourth, fifth, sixth generation, because you have to hope at that point that there has been a 2G actively doing it or a 3G actively doing it. Because if the 2Gs and the 3Gs don't, and a 4G comes along and they want to start doing it, well, that's great, but it makes it all that much harder, especially if their great-grandparent was not recorded or documented.
Yes.
There are 2Gs who don't have recordings of their parents' testimonies, and they have a hard enough time trying to put together presentations and talking about it, because a lot of survivors didn't talk about it at home. They didn't talk about it with the kids. So if they didn't sit down and do an interview at some point, it's very challenging to put it all together. So I can only imagine when you hit that 4G, 5G, 6G, what putting that together would even look like, unless there was a 2G or a 3G who had the foresight to do it themselves.
Absolutely.
When they could.
You hear that all the time. Even some of the survivors who were young wished that they had talked to their parents
Absolutely.
more, gotten those answers.
Yeah.
And they don't have them. So they have to kind of try to fill in the blanks the best they can based on history, using history as a guide, knowing where their parents were, reading other testimony, and then kind of saying, all right, this must have been what it was like for them, because this is what it was like for these 4 other people I read about.
Right.
But it's not quite the same.
No, it's not. But when, it's one of those things where we know, because of the behind the scenes of working with the 2Gs or survivors in some cases, as they build their testimonies and their PowerPoints, we know that maybe they're not so sure about what their parents experienced or what they ate on a daily basis in the ghetto. Maybe they didn't know those exact, fine details, but when they present it to the kids don't know.
Right.
And that's the power of it, is that, even if you don't give all the dates during the testimony, right? You just tell the story, you tell the themes, and you focus on the highlights and the key points that are going to get the message across to the kids. You don't need the dates.
No.
You don't need to know exactly what day such and such was invaded, or what day the family was taken to the ghetto and deported, whatever, all that. It's great to have, but you don't need it.
It's about the humanity.
Absolutely.
That is the issue. So, recently I was just in a school, and I was having a conversation about courage, about fear, the relationship between courage and fear. Why aren't people more courageous? And we had a lot of interesting conversations. And, when we talked about, why aren't kids more courageous? And we talked something simple about sports. Why do kids on the playing field talk down to each other when they're on the basketball court, when they're on the football field, when they're playing soccer? Why do they antagonize the other team? Why is that acceptable? And the kids, really didn't have an answer.
Yeah.
They really couldn't articulate why that, but it's all, everything is done.
Yeah.
And at the end of the conversation, one kid at the end said, when we were talking about why people aren't more courageous, said, it's easier just to ignore it. It's easier just to put your head down and not deal with it. And I said, I get where you're coming from. It's a very sad statement.
It is. But it's true. And I think we can all relate to it. We all know it.
And we can relate. So then we talked about, all right, well, if that's true, in the moment you don't want to react. You don't know what to do. What could be the next step? And then we kind of articulated, well, we could then follow through. We could talk to our parents. We can talk to a teacher. We can talk to an administrator.
Yeah.
We can figure out why we couldn't handle it, or why we felt the lack of inaction. But that doesn't mean we just have to let it go. It still can be addressed.
Absolutely.
Even after the fact.
Absolutely.
So we kind of left it with that it's not, the glass is not half full. It's not half empty. It's half full.
Yeah.
And that's all we can do.
Absolutely. Or, and even if, and every situation is so different, but even if there really isn't something that they feel they can do, and they just leave it there, it's still a learning experience for the next time. And that's it. We're not trying to shame kids, of course, into feeling like if you don't say something, you're a bad person or this and that, but it's, we're trying to teach them about what it can lead to, and how one day, maybe you don't say something, but then the next day, a week later, a month later, something similar or something very different happens, and you do something that time. You think back, and it's about preparing yourself for the next time. I think a lot of us in life, maybe we have a conversation with someone, whether it be at home, at school, at work, and we don't love the way that we presented ourselves. We don't love the way that it went. We wish that we had said something different. And, there's nothing that can be done. The conversation is over. But we think the next time. And then we all find ourselves in similar situations days, weeks, months later, and we think back and we do something about it. So, and it goes in the same direction. And that's what I personally love. One of my favorite parts of the programming that we do with the kids is when we talk about those roles and we say to them that they're fluid and every day they change. And we've all played all of them. We've all been the victim. We've all been the bystander. We've all been the perpetrator. And that's okay. But we just have to make an effort to change that the next time. And that's it. We're not shaming anybody.
No, I always say to them, every day is a new day.
Yeah.
Every day you wake up and you have a new a means of leading your life. And you can change your narrative anytime you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Donna. This was a wonderful conversation.
No
and
problem.
I look
Thank
forward to chatting with you again soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah.